Quinn Ramsay had spent 3 months trying to teach his dog to sit, and the stubborn mutt had learned nothing except how to look at him with disdainful brown eyes, while Quinn waved jerky in the air like a fool. The spring of 1878 had been merciless in Winslow, Arizona, with dust storms that choked the life out of anything green, and a heat that made a man question his sanity for settling in such unforgiving territory. Quinn had bought the ranch 6 miles outside town with money saved from years of cattle drives, determined to build something permanent, something that belonged to him alone. The ranch house was modest but sturdy, built with his own hands over the course of 2 winters. He had 20 head of cattle, a decent horse named Copper, and one completely useless dog named Rusty, who seemed to believe obedience was beneath his dignity. Quinn stood in the yard that morning, boots planted in the red dirt, watching Rusty chase a lizard across the property with single-minded determination. The dog was a mixed breed, part hound and part something else entirely, with a rust-colored coat that matched the Arizona landscape and ears that flopped when he ran. Quinn had found him half-starved on the trail last summer, ribs showing through mangy fur, and had made the mistake of feeding him. Since then, Rusty had appointed himself permanent resident of the ranch while refusing to learn a single command. "Rusty, come here," Quinn called, his voice firm but not unkind. The dog glanced back, tongue lolling, then returned his attention to the lizard disappearing under a rock. Quinn sighed and removed his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that had seen more loneliness than he cared to admit. The ranch kept him busy during the day, but evenings stretched long and quiet, filled with nothing but the sound of wind through the scrub brush and his own thoughts for company. He was considering giving up on dog training entirely when he heard a sound that made him freeze. A woman's voice, clear and melodic, drifted across the desert air from somewhere beyond the ridge that bordered his property. "That's it, gentle now. Good boy. You're doing wonderfully." Quinn grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the porch post, more from habit than genuine alarm. Strangers didn't often wander this far from town, and a woman alone in this territory was unusual enough to warrant caution. He walked toward the ridge, boots crunching on the hard, packed earth, and climbed the gentle slope that overlooked the creek bed. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. A woman knelt in the shade of a cottonwood tree beside the nearly dry creek, and around her sat 3 coyotes as calm as house cats. She held her hand out, palm up, and one of the wild animals sniffed it cautiously before sitting back on its haunches. The woman laughed, a sound like water over stones, and reached into a leather satchel beside her to produce what looked like dried meat. She tossed small pieces to each coyote, praising them in that same gentle voice. Quinn's rifle lowered slightly as he watched in stunned silence. Coyotes were skittish creatures, dangerous when cornered, and smart enough to avoid humans under normal circumstances. Yet these 3 sat around this woman like she was Snow White in one of those fairy tales his mother had read to him as a child. The woman herself was unlike anyone he had ever seen in Winslow. She wore a simple calico dress in faded blue, practical for the territory but clean and well-mended. Her hair was the color of honey, pulled back in a long braid that hung down her back, and even from this distance, he could see the focused intelligence in her face as she studied the animals. She appeared to be in her early 20s, young but with a composure that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. Rusty chose that moment to come bounding up beside Quinn, apparently having lost interest in the lizard. The dog's sudden appearance startled Quinn enough that he took a step back, and a rock skittered down the slope. All three coyotes' heads snapped toward him in unison, and in a heartbeat, they scattered into the brush like smoke on the wind. The woman stood quickly, her hand going to her satchel, her body tense with wariness. "I apologize for startling them," Quinn called out, realizing how he must look standing on the ridge with a rifle. He quickly lowered it to his side, trying to appear less threatening. "I didn't mean to intrude." The woman's posture relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained cautious. "You're on your own land, I assume. I should apologize for trespassing. I've been following the creek bed, studying the wildlife in the area." Quinn made his way down the slope, Rusty trotting ahead of him. "Quinn Ramsay. I own the ranch just over this ridge, and you don't need to apologize. The creek runs through multiple properties. You're welcome to it." "Tessa Vaughn," she replied, brushing dust from her skirt. "I arrived in Winslow 3 days ago. I'm conducting research on animal behavior in the Arizona Territory." Quinn had reached the bottom of the slope now, close enough to see that her eyes were the color of sage, green with flecks of gray, and that her face held a determination that matched her voice. "Research? Are you with a university?" A shadow crossed her face. "I was. Until they decided that a woman in the field was too unconventional for their reputation. Now I'm conducting my studies independently, documenting my findings in hopes of publishing them privately." Before Quinn could respond, Rusty bounded up to Tessa with his usual lack of manners, jumping and circling her with enthusiasm. Quinn opened his mouth to call him off, expecting the dog to be his typical unruly self. But Tessa simply held out her hand, low and non-threatening. "Hello there, beautiful boy," she said softly. "Aren't you energetic?" To Quinn's absolute astonishment, Rusty just sat down, right there in the dirt, his tail wagging but his hindquarters firmly planted, looking up at Tessa with what could only be described as adoration. "How did you do that?" Quinn asked, unable to keep the shock from his voice. "I've been trying to teach him to sit for months." Tessa smiled, and it transformed her entire face, lighting it with warmth. "Animals respond to energy more than commands. He can sense that I'm calm and confident, not frustrated or demanding. May I try something? Please do. If you can teach that dog anything, I'll be in your debt." Tessa knelt down to Rusty's level, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "What's his name?" "Rusty." "Hello, Rusty," she said, letting the dog sniff her hand thoroughly. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a piece of the dried meat she had been feeding the coyotes. "This is venison I prepared myself. Would you like to try working with him?" Quinn nodded, fascinated despite himself. He had dealt with animals his entire life, had broken horses and worked cattle drives and hunted game, but he had never seen anyone move with such natural grace around creatures. "Rusty," Tessa said, her voice clear and calm. "Down." She made a smooth downward motion with her hand, and the dog dropped to his belly without hesitation. Quinn's jaw actually fell open. "Good boy," Tessa praised, giving Rusty the piece of venison. "He's very intelligent. He's just been confused about what you wanted from him." Dogs read our body language more than our words. If you're tense or frustrated when you give a command, they sense it and become anxious themselves. She spent the next 20 minutes showing Quinn how to hold his hand, how to modulate his voice, how to reward Rusty immediately when he responded correctly. The dog performed every command she gave, sitting, lying down, staying, coming when called. Quinn watched in amazement as the animal he had considered hopeless transformed into an obedient companion. "You have a gift," Quinn said when she finally stood, dusting off her dress. "I've never seen anything like it." Tessa's smile turned slightly sad. "My father used to say I could talk to animals. He was a veterinarian in Philadelphia." I grew up in his surgery, helping him with everything from house cats to carriage horses. When he died 2 years ago, I wanted to continue his work, but no veterinary school would accept a female student. So I turned to research instead. And the university threw you out for being too unconventional. Quinn felt a flare of anger on her behalf. That's damn foolish of them. Language, Tessa said, but her eyes sparkled with amusement, though I appreciate the sentiment. The dean's wife convinced him that a young, unmarried woman traveling alone to study wild animals was unseemly. They revoked my position and refused to fund my research. So I took what savings I had and came west, where there are animals that haven't been studied extensively and where, frankly, people are too busy surviving to care much about propriety. Quinn found himself smiling. That's the truth. Winslow isn't much for social niceties. Where are you staying? The boarding house in town. Mrs. Fletcher runs it. She's been kind enough to rent me a room week by week, though I'm running through my funds faster than I'd like. An idea formed in Quinn's mind, reckless and impulsive, but feeling right nonetheless. What if I offered you a proposition? You teach me how to properly train Rusty, and I'll pay you. Maybe you could even help me with the cattle and horses. God knows I could use someone with your skills around the ranch. Tessa regarded him with those sage-colored eyes, and he could see her mind working, weighing the offer. Mr. Ramsay, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate. A single woman spending time alone with a single man at his ranch, even for legitimate work, would cause talk. Let them talk, Quinn said, surprising himself with his vehemence. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. You need the money to continue your research, and I genuinely need help with the animals. What does it matter what the gossips in town say? She studied him for a long moment, and Quinn found himself hoping desperately that she would agree. It wasn't just about Rusty or the ranch, though those were real enough needs. It was the way she had laughed when the coyote sat for her, the passion in her voice when she talked about her research, the determined set of her shoulders when she mentioned the university that had dismissed her. In the span of 30 minutes, Tessa Vaughn had become the most interesting person he had met in Arizona. All right, she said finally. I'll come 3 times a week to work with your animals, and in return, you'll pay me enough to cover my room and supplies. But Mr. Ramsay, this is strictly a professional arrangement. Strictly professional, Quinn agreed, extending his hand. And please call me Quinn. Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. Then you should call me Tessa. That handshake, there in the shade of the cottonwood with Rusty sitting obediently between them, and the Arizona sun climbing toward noon, marked the beginning of everything that would change Quinn's life. Tessa arrived at the ranch the following morning just after dawn, riding a sweet-tempered bay mare she had rented from the livery. Quinn had been up for hours, trying to make the place look more presentable, though there was only so much a bachelor could do with a ranch that had been built for function rather than beauty. I hope 6 o'clock isn't too early, Tessa said as she dismounted. She wore the same calico dress, and Quinn realized it was probably one of only a few she owned. I wanted to work with the animals while it's still cool. Perfect timing, Quinn said, taking her mare's reins and tying the horse to the rail near his own. I've got coffee on if you'd like some before we start. They sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of orange and pink, drinking bitter coffee from tin cups. Rusty lay at Tessa's feet, already devoted to his new teacher. Tell me about your cattle, Tessa said. You mentioned having trouble with them, Quinn nodded. 20 head. They're range cattle, mostly wild, and getting them to do anything civilized is like trying to herd cats. I need to move them to the south pasture where there's better grazing, but every time I try, they scatter to the 4 winds. Cattle are herd animals, Tessa said thoughtfully. They follow patterns and leaders. Do you have a lead cow? One that the others naturally follow? There's an old brindle cow who seems to be in charge, ornery thing with a scar across her face. I call her Scar, real creative, I know. Tessa laughed, and Quinn found himself wanting to make her laugh again. Show me this scar. I'd like to observe the herd's behavior. They spent the morning in the pasture, Tessa taking notes in a small leather journal while Quinn pointed out the different cattle. She watched how the animals moved, which ones stayed close together, which ones wandered to the periphery. She paid particular attention to Scar, the brindle cow with the damaged face who stood slightly apart from the others, chewing cud and watching them with suspicious eyes. She's been hurt by humans before, Tessa observed. See how she positions herself to keep us in her line of sight, and that scar looks like it came from a rope or brand that went wrong. She doesn't trust easily. Most things in this territory don't, Quinn said. Can't say I blame them. Tessa glanced at him, curiosity in her expression. You sound like you speak from experience. Quinn shrugged. Spent most of my life on cattle drives, working for other men's dreams. Saved every penny for 10 years to buy this place. I know what it's like to be cautious to protect what's yours. Is that why you live out here alone? To protect what's yours? The question was direct but not unkind. Quinn found himself answering honestly. Partly. Mostly I got tired of drifting, wanted roots, wanted something permanent. I understand that, Tessa said softly. After my father died, I felt unmoored, like I could float away and no one would notice. That's part of why I came west, to find something solid to hold on to even if it's just my research. They shared a moment of understanding, two solitary people recognizing the loneliness in each other. And then Tessa turned her attention back to the cattle. Over the next week, Tessa came to the ranch every other day, and each time, Quinn learned something new. She taught him how to approach Scar obliquely, not head-on, moving in slow arcs that didn't trigger the cow's flight instinct. She showed him how to use Rusty, now reliably obedient, to gently pressure the cattle from the sides rather than chasing them from behind. She explained the concept of pressure and release, how to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. But more than the practical knowledge, Quinn found himself learning Tessa herself. He learned that she hummed while she worked, unconscious melodies that seemed to calm the animals. He learned that she had a passion for sketching, and her journal was filled with detailed drawings of birds and insects and plants. He learned that she took her coffee with honey when she could get it, that she had a younger sister back in Philadelphia who wrote her long letters begging her to come home and be sensible, and that she could recite entire passages from Darwin's writings from memory. You believe in it? Quinn asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade of the barn, taking a break from working with copper. Evolution, I mean. Natural selection. Tessa considered the question seriously. I believe the evidence is compelling. I've seen how animals adapt to their environments, how certain traits persist because they help survival. But I also believe there's room for wonder. Science doesn't diminish the miracle of life, Quinn. It illuminates it. He loved the way she said his name, with a slight emphasis on the sound, like it was a word worth speaking carefully. The preacher back in Texas where I grew up would have called that blasphemy, he said. And yet here you are, asking the question anyway. Tessa smiled. That's the mark of an intelligent mind, not accepting easy answers just because they're comfortable. Quinn felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. No one had ever called him intelligent before. Capable, sure. Hard-working, reliable, steady. But not intelligent, not someone worth having deep conversations with. It was during the third week of their arrangement that things shifted between them. Tessa had come early, before dawn, wanting to observe the coyotes she had been tracking during their most active hunting time. She had asked if Quinn wanted to join her, and he had agreed without hesitation. They walked through the pre-dawn darkness, Rusty trotting quietly at their heels, following the creek bed toward a rocky outcropping where Tessa had spotted a den. The air was cool, almost cold, a brief respite before the heat of the day. Their breath misted slightly, and Quinn found himself acutely aware of Tessa's presence beside him, the sound of her footsteps, the rustle of her skirt against the brush. "There," she whispered, touching his arm and pointing. 3 coyotes emerged from the rocks, the same 3 she had been feeding before. But this time, 2 pups tumbled out after them, all legs and oversized ears, playing in the dust while their parents watched for danger. Tessa's face transformed with delight. She carefully sat down on a flat rock, motioning for Quinn to do the same, and they watched in silence as the coyote family went about their morning routine. The pups wrestled and chased each other while one adult sat guard and the other trotted off, presumably to hunt. The scene was so domestic, so familiar despite the wildness of the creatures, that Quinn felt something shift in his chest. "They're just like us," he murmured, "protecting their family, teaching their young, trying to survive." "Exactly," Tessa breathed. "That's what I'm trying to document." The similarities between wild animals and humans, the complex social structures, the emotions. Most people think animals are simple creatures driven purely by instinct, but it's not true. They love, they grieve, they play, they learn. She turned to look at him, her face inches from his in the growing dawn light, and Quinn saw tears shining in her eyes. "This is why I left Philadelphia. This moment right here." No university hall could ever compare to watching life unfold in its natural state, seeing the connections between all living things. My father understood that. He used to say that animals were God's first language, and if we wanted to understand creation, we had to learn to listen to them. Quinn found himself reaching out, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The gesture was intimate, far beyond the bounds of their professional arrangement, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "He sounds like he was a wise man," Quinn said softly. "He was. I miss him every day." Tessa didn't pull away from his touch. "Do you have family?" Quinn had. "Parents died of cholera when I was 16. No siblings, just me." "I'm sorry, don't be. It was a long time ago, taught me to be self-reliant." "Self-reliant is good," Tessa said. "But everyone needs someone. Even lone wolves run in packs eventually." They sat there as the sun rose, painting the sky in brilliant colors, watching the coyote pups play, and Quinn felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. The hope that maybe he wouldn't always be alone, that maybe this brilliant, passionate woman with dirt on her dress and stars in her eyes might see something in him worth staying for. When they finally walked back to the ranch, the sun fully up and the heat beginning to build, their hands brushed together once, twice, and on the third time, Quinn gathered his courage and took her hand in his. Tessa's fingers intertwined with his and she squeezed gently, a silent acknowledgement that whatever was growing between them was mutual. They didn't talk about it, not yet. They simply walked hand in hand through the desert morning, Rusty leading the way, and it felt like a promise. But promises in the Arizona territory were fragile things, easily broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. 2 days later, Quinn rode into Winslow to pick up supplies and heard the rumors that would complicate everything. He was in the general store, paying for flour and coffee, and a small jar of honey that he definitely didn't buy just because Tessa liked it in her coffee, when he heard 2 women talking in hushed voices near the fabric counter. "It's disgraceful. That's what it is." A young woman, unmarried, spending all her time alone with that Ramsay fellow at his ranch. Well, what do you expect? She's one of those educated types, thinks she's above normal society. Studying animals, if you can believe it. What kind of proper woman does such a thing? Quinn's jaw clenched. He turned to face the women, both wives of prominent town merchants, their faces pinched with disapproval. Excuse me, ladies, but Miss Vaughn is conducting important scientific research, and I'm paying her fairly for her expertise with my livestock. There's nothing improper about our arrangement. The older of the two women, Mrs. Patterson, fixed him with a cold stare. Mr. Ramsay, intentions may be pure, but appearances matter. A young woman's reputation is a delicate thing. Already there's talk of involving the preacher, perhaps having a word with Miss Vaughn about more appropriate behavior for someone of her sex and station. Quinn felt anger rise hot in his chest, but before he could say something he might regret, a commanding voice cut through the store. Perhaps you ladies should concern yourselves with your own affairs and leave Miss Vaughn to hers. Everyone turned to see Jacob Fletcher, the town's doctor and husband to the woman who ran the boarding house where Tessa stayed. He was a stern man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and a reputation for speaking his mind. My wife tells me Miss Vaughn is a perfectly respectable young woman conducting legitimate research, Dr. Fletcher continued. She's shown my wife her journals and drawings, and I can attest that the work is scientifically sound and quite impressive. If this town had any sense, we'd be proud to have such an educated person in our midst instead of tearing her down with petty gossip. Mrs. Patterson huffed. Well, I never. Perhaps you should try it sometime, Dr. Fletcher said dryly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to. Quinn caught up with the doctor outside the store. Thank you for that, Dr. Fletcher. I appreciate you standing up for Miss Vaughn. The doctor studied him with shrewd eyes. My wife likes the girl. Says she's passionate about her work and kind to everyone at the boarding house. But Quinn, I'll be straight with you. This town may be rough around the edges, but it still has its share of people who think women should stay in neat little boxes. If you care about Miss Vaughn, and I suspect you do, you need to think about how to protect her reputation while still allowing her to do her work. What do you suggest? Honestly, marry her. But that's a drastic solution if you're not already inclined that way. Dr. Fletcher tipped his hat. Just be careful. Good people can get hurt by wagging tongues. Quinn rode back to the ranch with the doctor's words echoing in his mind. Marry her. The thought didn't frighten him the way it should have. In fact, it felt right, natural, like a solution to a problem he hadn't fully articulated. But they had known each other less than a month. Surely it was too soon to have such thoughts. And yet, every moment with Tessa felt like coming home. He found her at the ranch when he arrived, earlier than expected. She was in the corral with Copper, his horse that had always been skittish about having his hooves handled. Tessa had the horse's front hoof propped on her bent knee, calmly cleaning it with a pick while talking to Copper in that soothing voice of hers. That's a good boy. I know this hoof bothers you, but we need to get that stone out. There we go. All better now, isn't it? Copper, who had thrown Quinn twice in the past month when he tried the same thing, stood calmly and let Tessa work. Quinn leaned against the corral fence, content to watch. When Tessa finished and released Copper's hoof, she patted the horse's neck and turned, startling slightly when she saw Quinn. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to see you work magic again, Quinn said. How did you get him to let you handle that hoof? He's always been touchy about it. There's an old injury, looks like a poorly healed abscess. It still causes him pain when pressure is applied wrong. I showed him that I could handle it without hurting him, and he learned to trust me. She walked over to the fence, her face flushed from exertion and sun. How was town? Quinn hesitated, then decided honesty was best. There's talk about you spending time here. Some people think it's improper. Tessa's expression hardened. Of course there is. Heaven forbid a woman do anything beyond cooking and sewing and waiting for a husband. Dr. Fletcher defended you, told the gossips to mind their own business. That was kind of him. His wife has been very supportive. Tessa sighed, removing her work gloves. Should I stop coming? I don't want to cause problems for you, Quinn. No, he said firmly. I don't give a damn what they think, but I wanted you to know in case any of it gets back to you. Tessa studied his face for a moment, then smiled. You know what I appreciate about you, Quinn Ramsay? You don't treat me like I'm fragile. You don't try to protect me from harsh truths or make decisions for me. You just tell me straight and let me choose for myself. You're the strongest person I know, Quinn said honestly. It would be insulting to treat you otherwise. Something shifted in Tessa's expression, softening into something warm and open. She reached through the fence rails and took his hand. I'm going to keep coming here, gossip be damned. This work is too important to me, and honestly, so are you. Quinn's heart hammered in his chest. Tessa, I need to tell you something. These past few weeks, working with you, talking with you, they've been the best weeks of my life. I know it's fast, probably too fast, but I can't help how I feel. I'm falling in love with you. Tessa's breath caught. For a moment, Quinn feared he had miscalculated, spoken too soon. But then she was climbing through the fence rails, not bothering with the gate and standing in front of him, her hands coming up to frame his face. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I fought it. Told myself it was foolish, that I came here for my research, not for romance. But Quinn, when I'm with you, I feel like I can be completely myself. You see me, really see me, not just as a woman who should be doing women's things, but as a person with value and intelligence and worth. Quinn cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. Your mind, your passion, your kindness to every living creature. How could I not love you? They kissed there in the afternoon sun, gentle at first, tentative, and then with growing passion. Tessa's hands slid into his hair, and Quinn wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and eager and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tessa laughed breathlessly. Well, that certainly changes our professional arrangement. To hell with professional, Quinn said, resting his forehead against hers. Marry me, Tessa. I know it's sudden, but I've never been more certain of anything. Marry me, and we'll build a life here together. You can continue your research, and I'll help however I can. We'll show this town that a woman can be a wife and a scientist, that love and passion for one's work can coexist. Tessa pulled back slightly, searching his face. Quinn, are you sure? Marriage is a big step, and you're right, it is sudden. What if we're caught up in the moment? I've been alone my whole life, Quinn said. I know what loneliness feels like, what it means to go through days without anyone who really understands you. And then you showed up, teaching my dog tricks I never could, charming coyotes and cattle and horses, seeing beauty in this harsh land that most people miss entirely. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes again, but these were happy tears. Yes, yes, Quinn, I'll marry you. I'll be your wife, and we'll figure out everything else together. They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Rusty barked from where he had been watching nearby, as if offering his approval. They decided to marry quickly, partly because neither saw the point in a long engagement and partly because getting married would silence the town gossips once and for all. Dr. Fletcher and his wife agreed to stand as witnesses, and the preacher, though clearly surprised by the hasty courtship, agreed to perform the ceremony. Tessa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Fletcher helped her sew, using fabric they ordered special from the catalog. Quinn bought a new shirt and had his one good suit cleaned. The wedding took place in the small church in Winslow on a Saturday morning in late May, with only a handful of people in attendance. But to Quinn, standing at the altar and watching Tessa walk down the aisle with her honey-colored hair pinned up and wildflowers in her hands, it was the most important moment of his life. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness, and when she took his hands and spoke her vows, her voice was strong and sure. "I, Tessa Vaughn, take you, Quinn Ramsay, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, to support your dreams as you support mine, to be your partner in all things, and to build a life with you that honors both tradition and progress." Quinn's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke his own vows. "I, Quinn Ramsay, take you, Tessa Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish you, to respect your intelligence and independence, to stand beside you through whatever challenges come, and to love you for all my days." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed Tessa with joy and tenderness, and the small congregation applauded. They were married, bound together legally and spiritually, two solitary souls who had found their match in the Arizona desert. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Fletcher providing a simple but delicious meal and a small cake she had baked for the occasion. The guests were few but genuine in their congratulations. Dr. Fletcher made a toast to Quinn and Tessa. "May your marriage be filled with love, understanding, and the occasional well-trained dog." Everyone laughed, and Tessa squeezed Quinn's hand under the table. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to disperse, Quinn and Tessa prepared to ride back to the ranch, their ranch now together. Mrs. Fletcher pulled Tessa aside for a private word while Quinn loaded their things onto the wagon he had brought. "You're a brave woman," Mrs. Fletcher said quietly. "Not many would choose to continue their work after marriage, but I believe you can do it. Just remember to make time for each other, too. Love requires tending like any growing thing." "Thank you," Tessa said, embracing the older woman, "for everything. Your support has meant the world to me." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the evening air cooling as the sun began its descent. Quinn drove the wagon while Tessa sat close beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. Rusty trotted alongside and Tessa's mare was tied to the back. "Are you nervous?" Quinn asked softly. Tessa considered. "A little, but more excited than nervous. This feels right, Quinn. Like we're exactly where we're supposed to be." "I feel the same." When they arrived at the ranch, Quinn insisted on carrying Tessa over the threshold, even though she protested that it was silly. He swept her up in his arms, making her laugh, and carried her through the door of the small ranch house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ramsay," he said, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Ramsay," Tessa repeated, testing the sound of it. "It has a nice ring to it. Though for my research publications, I'll probably still use Vaughn. I hope that doesn't bother you." "Use whatever name you want," Quinn said, pulling her close. "I'm just honored that you chose to share your life with me." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other in the intimate darkness of the bedroom. Quinn was gentle, mindful that this was new territory for both of them, and Tessa was curious and eager, her scientific mind giving way to pure sensation and emotion. They came together with love and longing, and afterward lay tangled in each other's arms, talking softly until sleep claimed them. The first months of their marriage fell into a comfortable rhythm. Tessa continued her research, now with Quinn as an active participant and assistant. They spent mornings working together on the ranch, training Rusty in increasingly complex tasks, working with the cattle and horses, and maintaining the property. Afternoons, Tessa would often go out to observe the local wildlife, sketching and taking notes, while Quinn handled the heavier ranch work. But they always came together for dinner, preparing meals side by side in the small kitchen, talking about their days. Quinn loved listening to Tessa describe her observations. The way her face lit up when she explained some new behavior she had witnessed or theory she was developing. And Tessa seemed genuinely interested in the ranch operations, offering suggestions based on her understanding of animal behavior that often proved remarkably effective. "I've been thinking," Tessa said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "about trying to gentler methods with the cattle during branding. I know it's a necessary part of ranching, but the traditional methods create so much stress for the animals. What if we developed a system using pens and chutes that made the process calmer?" Quinn considered it. "It would take time and lumber to build, but if it worked, it might be worth it. Stressed cattle don't gain weight as well, and they're harder to handle long term." "Exactly. And think of the precedent it would set. If we can show that humane treatment leads to better results, other ranchers might adopt similar methods." "You want to revolutionize the cattle industry, don't you?" Quinn teased gently. Tessa grinned. "Is that so wrong? Why should we accept that things have always been done a certain way if there's a better approach? It's not wrong at all. It's one of the things I love about you. You're never satisfied with good enough. You always push for better." They shared a kiss as the sky turned purple and orange, and Rusty sighed contentedly at their feet. But their peaceful existence was disrupted when trouble came from an unexpected direction. It was late August, the heat at its most oppressive, when a man rode up to the ranch. Quinn was repairing a section of fence while Tessa worked with copper in the corral. The stranger was well dressed in expensive Eastern clothes that looked completely out of place in the Arizona desert. "Can I help you?" Quinn called, walking over to meet the man. The stranger dismounted, removing his hat to reveal graying hair and a pinched, aristocratic face. "I'm looking for a Miss Tessa Vaughn. I was told she might be found at this ranch." Tessa had looked up at the sound of voices. She handed Copper's lead to Quinn and walked over, her expression wary. "I'm Tessa Vaughn, though it's Tessa Ramsay now. Who are you?" The man's eyebrows rose. "Married? How unexpected. I am Howard Bingham, your late father's attorney. I've been searching for you for nearly 3 months, Miss Vaughn, or I suppose Mrs. Ramsay now." "Why?" Tessa asked bluntly. "Everything was settled after my father's death. The practice was sold to pay his debts, and what little remained went to my sister and me." "That's what we all believed," Bingham said, reaching into his satchel to pull out a legal document. "However, an investment your father made years ago has recently matured. A mining operation in Colorado that everyone assumed was worthless has struck a significant silver vein. As your father's heir, you're entitled to half the proceeds. Your sister received her share 2 months ago in Philadelphia." Tessa took the document with shaking hands, scanning it quickly. Quinn read over her shoulder and felt his own shock at the figure listed. It was enough money to buy 10 ranches the size of his. "This can't be right," Tessa said faintly. "This amount, it's enormous." "It's quite right, I assure you. The mining company has been very successful. You're a wealthy woman now, Mrs. Ramsay." Bingham looked around the modest ranch with barely concealed distaste. "I assume you'll want to return to Philadelphia now. This is hardly a suitable life for a woman of means." Quinn felt his stomach drop. He hadn't even considered that possibility. With this kind of money, Tessa could go anywhere, do anything. She could fund her own research expeditions, publish her findings, live in comfort and luxury. Why would she stay in the Arizona desert with a poor rancher? But Tessa's expression hardened. "Mr. Bingham, thank you for bringing this to my attention. However, my life and where I choose to live it are not your concern. I'll need you to make arrangements to transfer the funds to the bank in Winslow. My husband and I will decide together how best to use them." Bingham looked scandalized. "But Mrs. Ramsay, surely you don't intend to stay here. This money could open doors for you. You could live in society, marry well." He trailed off, seeming to remember that she was already married. "I have married well," Tessa said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." The attorney left, still sputtering about wasted opportunities, and Tessa and Quinn stood in the yard, the legal document heavy between them. "Tessa," Quinn said carefully, "if you want to use that money to go back east to set yourself up properly, I would understand." She turned to him, eyes blazing. "Is that what you think? That money would make me leave you? It's a lot of money. It could give you opportunities I never could." "Quinn Ramsay, you listen to me. I didn't marry you for your money or your ranch or any practical reason. I married you because I love you, because you see me for who I truly am and value that person. This money, it's wonderful, and yes, it opens up possibilities. But those possibilities are for us together, not for me alone." Relief flooded through Quinn so intensely that he had to sit down on the porch steps. Tessa sat beside him, taking his hand. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked. Tessa was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want to expand the ranch. Buy more land, build better facilities for the animals. I want to set up a proper research station where I can document wildlife behavior year-round. And I want to establish a fund to support other women who want to pursue scientific study, but lack the means. No one should have to give up their dreams because of money or because society says it's not appropriate for their sex." Quinn felt love swell in his chest. Of course she wanted to use the money to help others, to further her work, to make things better. That was who Tessa was. "That sounds perfect," he said. "All of it." Over the following months, they put the money to work. They purchased an additional 200 acres surrounding the ranch, giving them control over the creek and the surrounding territory where Tessa's coyotes denned. Quinn hired 2 ranch hands to help with the expanded cattle operation. And together, he and Tessa designed and built a proper research building, a sturdy structure with wide windows for natural light, work tables for her journals and drawings, and shelves for the growing collection of specimens and observations she was accumulating. Tessa also commissioned a carpenter to build the humane cattle handling system she had designed, with high-sided chutes and a squeeze pen that minimized stress during branding and medical treatment. When they used it for the first time with their expanded herd of 50 cattle, the difference was remarkable. The cattle moved through calmly, the work was completed faster, and there were no injuries to animals or people. Word spread among other ranchers in the territory, and soon, men were coming from as far as Flagstaff to see the Ramsay Ranch's innovative handling system. Quinn gave tours, explaining the principles Tessa had taught him, and several ranchers placed orders with the carpenter for similar setups. "You're becoming famous," Quinn told Tessa one evening as they reviewed her latest journal entries. "We're becoming famous," she corrected. "This is our work, Quinn. I may have the theoretical knowledge, but you're the one who makes it practical, who shows other ranchers that it works in real-world conditions." Their partnership extended beyond the ranch. Tessa had begun corresponding with several universities and scientific societies back east, submitting papers on her observations of coyote behavior, cattle handling, and the ecosystem of the Arizona Territory. To her delight and vindication, several prestigious journals accepted her work for publication, her name appearing in print as T.V. Ramsay, researcher. "They probably think you're a man," Quinn said, reading the acceptance letter over her shoulder. Then they'll be surprised when they eventually meet me, Tessa said with satisfaction. But my work speaks for itself. Let them judge it on its merits before they know my sex. The first winter of their marriage was mild by Arizona standards, but it brought its own challenges. Tessa discovered she was pregnant in December, the realization coming when her monthly courses stopped and morning sickness began. Dr. Fletcher confirmed it, examining her in his office in town while Quinn waited anxiously outside. "You're healthy and strong, Mrs. Ramsay," the doctor said. "I see no reason why you shouldn't have a perfectly normal pregnancy. The baby should arrive sometime in early summer. I'd estimate July or August." Tessa was radiant when she emerged to tell Quinn the news. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "We're going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "Tessa, we're going to have a baby. I know. I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. You'll be an amazing mother. Look at how you are with every living creature. This baby will be so loved." Tessa's pregnancy was relatively easy, though she chafed at Dr. Fletcher's suggestion that she reduce her physical activity. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she protested. But Quinn worried, and Tessa, seeing his concern, compromised. She continued her observations and research, but allowed Quinn and the ranch hands to take over the heavier work. Her body changed, her belly growing round with their child, and Quinn found her even more beautiful than before. He would place his hands on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move, marveling at the life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat in the parlor, Tessa knitting small clothes while Quinn carved a wooden rattle. "Him." "You're so certain it's a boy, just a feeling. But if I'm wrong and we have a daughter, that will be wonderful too," Tessa smiled. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my father, Thomas Ramsay. And if it's a girl, I've always liked the name Margaret. She could go by Maggie." Quinn nodded. "Thomas or Margaret. Either way, they'll be lucky to have you as their mother." The baby arrived on a sweltering July afternoon in 1879. Tessa's labor began just after dawn, and Mrs. Fletcher came out from town to assist Dr. Fletcher with the delivery. Quinn paced the porch for hours, listening to Tessa's cries from the bedroom, feeling helpless and terrified. When the baby's wail finally cut through the afternoon air, Quinn burst through the door to find Dr. Fletcher holding a squirming, red-faced infant. "Congratulations, Quinn. You have a son." Tessa lay in the bed, exhausted but glowing, her hair damp with sweat and her arms reaching for the baby. Dr. Fletcher placed the infant in her arms, and Quinn sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny person they had made. "Thomas," Tessa whispered. "Hello, Thomas. We've been waiting for you." The baby had dark hair like Quinn and Tessa's nose, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the indeterminate blue of all newborns. Quinn reached out with one finger to touch his son's incredibly small hand, and Thomas's fingers closed around it with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Quinn said, his voice choked with emotion. "You did so well, Tessa. Thank you for this gift." "We did it together," Tessa said, but she was smiling. Thomas Ramsay was a good baby, relatively calm and easy to soothe. Tessa recovered quickly from the birth and was soon back to her research, though now she carried Thomas with her in a sling, the baby sleeping against her chest as she observed and took notes. Quinn marveled at her ability to balance motherhood with her work, never letting one completely subsume the other. "He needs to learn about the world," Tessa explained when Quinn expressed concern about taking such a young baby out into the desert. "And I need him to understand from the beginning that his mother is a person with interests beyond the home. Balance, Quinn. That's the key to everything." As Thomas grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's affinity for animals. By age 2, he could sit quietly in the presence of wild creatures that would have spooked at any other child's approach. The coyotes Tessa had been studying for years, who now had a second generation of pups, would venture surprisingly close when Thomas was present. "He has your gift," Quinn told Tessa, watching their son gently pet Rusty, who was getting old now but still devoted to the family. "Or perhaps all children have it, and we simply train it out of them," Tessa mused. "Notice how he doesn't grab or chase. He waits for the animal to come to him. That's instinctive patience, not learned behavior." By Thomas's 3rd birthday, the ranch had become a thriving operation. They ran 100 head of cattle, had expanded the house to include proper bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Tessa's research station had become known throughout the territory. She had published 5 papers in respected journals, and word had spread that the TV. Ramsay, whose groundbreaking work on animal behavior was being discussed in academic circles, was actually a woman working from a ranch in Arizona. A reporter from a San Francisco newspaper came to interview her, a young woman named Clara Jennings who was fascinated by Tessa's story. "You've achieved so much," Clara said, her pencil flying across her notebook as they talked in the research building. "A successful marriage, a thriving ranch, published scientific work, and motherhood. How do you manage it all?" Tessa glanced out the window to where Quinn was teaching Thomas to ride a small pony, both of them laughing. "I have a partner who believes in me and supports my work. That makes all the difference. Many women could do what I do if their husbands valued their intellect and ambitions as much as Quinn values mine." The article that resulted from that interview appeared in newspapers across the country. Suddenly, letters began arriving at the ranch from women all over America, thanking Tessa for showing that marriage and motherhood didn't have to mean the end of one's dreams. Some letters came from young girls who wanted to study science and were inspired by Tessa's example. Others came from married women who felt trapped by societal expectations and found hope in Tessa's story. Tessa answered every letter personally, encouraging the young girls to pursue their education and offering practical advice to the married women on how to negotiate with their husbands for the freedom to pursue their own interests. "You're starting a movement," Quinn observed, watching her write responses late into the evening. "I'm just living my life," Tessa said. "But if that helps other women see what's possible, then I'm glad." The fund Tessa had established to support women in scientific study began accepting applications. She personally reviewed each one, selecting recipients based on the merit of their proposed research and their financial need. The first grant went to a young woman in Massachusetts who wanted to study bird migration patterns, but whose family couldn't afford to send her to university. The second went to a widow in Oregon who had been documenting plant species in the wilderness areas of that state, but lacked funds for proper equipment. "You're changing lives," Quinn told her after she sent off the first round of grant letters. "My father's investment is changing lives," Tessa corrected. "I'm just the steward of it." But Quinn knew better. The money was just a tool. Tessa's vision, her determination to use her resources to lift other women up, that was what was truly making the difference. In the spring of 1883, when Thomas was nearly 4 years old, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was frequently exhausted, and the morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month. Dr. Fletcher, now getting on in years himself, monitored her closely. "Everything appears normal," he assured Quinn during one of Tessa's checkups. "Some pregnancies are simply more difficult than others. She needs rest and good nutrition, and she should be fine." But Tessa struggled with the forced inactivity. She was used to being busy, constantly moving and working, and being confined to the house and gentle activities frustrated her immensely. "I feel useless," she complained to Quinn one evening. "There's so much work to be done, and I'm sitting here like a decorative object." "You're growing our child," Quinn said, placing his hand on her swelling belly. "That's the most important work there is. And you're still writing, still corresponding with your grant recipients and publishing work. You're not useless, love. You're just focusing your energy differently for a while." Thomas, perceptive even at his young age, seemed to understand that his mother needed extra care. He would bring her flowers he picked from the desert, sit quietly beside her while she read, and tell her elaborate stories about the adventures he had with Rusty and the ranch hands. "You're going to be a big brother soon," Tessa told him, stroking his dark hair. "How do you feel about that?" Thomas considered seriously. "Will the baby like animals like we do?" "I imagine so. You can teach them all about the coyotes and horses and cattle. Then I think it's good. Everyone should have someone to teach." The baby arrived in November, a month early but healthy. This time it was a girl as different from Thomas as could be. Where he had been calm and easy, Margaret Ramsay announced her presence with lusty cries and a temperament that demanded attention. "She's fierce," Tessa said admiringly, nursing the baby while Thomas peered at his new sister with curiosity. "She takes after her mother," Quinn said, gently touching Maggie's downy blonde hair. "Strong and determined. Maggie indeed proved to be a force of nature." As she grew, she was constantly in motion, exploring everything, fearless in a way that both delighted and terrified her parents. Where Thomas would sit quietly observing an animal, Maggie would march right up to it, demanding its attention. Remarkably, it worked. Animals seemed charmed by her bold approach, responding to her confidence. "She's going to give us gray hair," Quinn said, watching 3-year-old Maggie confidently approach a young calf that outweighed her by several hundred pounds. "Probably," Tessa agreed. "But look how the calf responds to her. She's absolutely fearless, and animals respect that." By 1886, the Ramsay Ranch was one of the most successful in the Arizona Territory. They had expanded to 300 head of cattle, employed 5 full-time ranch hands, and had built a second barn to house the growing number of horses they were breeding using Tessa's gentling methods. The humane handling systems they had pioneered were now being used by ranchers throughout the Southwest, and Quinn had been invited to speak at a cattlemen's association meeting in Tucson about their methods. Tessa's scientific work had garnered international attention. She had been invited to present a paper at a symposium in Chicago, and after much deliberation, she and Quinn decided the whole family would make the trip. It would be Thomas and Maggie's first time leaving the territory, and Quinn's first time in a big city in over a decade. The journey by train was an adventure. Thomas, now 7, was fascinated by everything he saw, his nose pressed to the window as the landscape changed from desert to plains to the sprawling metropolis of Chicago. Maggie, at 3, was less interested in the scenery and more interested in charming every passenger in their car, making friends with a startling lack of shyness. "She's going to be a politician," Quinn joked as Maggie engaged an elderly businessman in conversation about his pocket watch. The symposium was held at a prestigious university, and Tessa was the only woman presenting. When she walked onto the stage to deliver her paper on social structures in wild canines, based on her years of observing the coyote families near their ranch, there was an audible murmur through the crowd. Many of the attendees had not realized that Tessa Ramsay was a woman, but Tessa was magnificent. She spoke with confidence and passion, her data meticulously presented, her conclusions sound and well supported. She fielded questions from skeptical academics with grace and intelligence, never once becoming flustered or defensive. By the end of her presentation, the audience was applauding enthusiastically, and several prominent scientists approached her afterward to discuss collaboration. Quinn watched from the audience with Thomas on his lap and Maggie beside him, pride swelling in his chest. This brilliant, accomplished woman was his wife, the mother of his children, his partner in all things. How had he gotten so lucky? That evening, at a dinner held for the symposium presenters, Quinn and Tessa met Dr. Alina Shaw, a professor of biology at Smith College who was fighting to establish more opportunities for women in scientific fields. "Mrs. Ramsay, your work is exceptional," Dr. Shaw said. "Have you ever considered teaching? We're always looking for qualified women to join our faculty." Tessa glanced at Quinn before answering. "I'm honored by the offer, Dr. Shaw, but my life is in Arizona. My research there is ongoing and my family is settled. However, I would be happy to contribute to your program in other ways. Perhaps I could deliver occasional lectures or mentor students through correspondence." Dr. Shaw smiled. "That would be wonderful. And perhaps some of your grant recipients might be interested in teaching positions when they complete their studies. I'll certainly suggest it to them." The trip to Chicago opened new doors for the family. Tessa's work gained even more recognition, leading to more publication opportunities and invitations to collaborate with researchers across the country. The grants program expanded, now supporting 12 women annually in their scientific pursuits. And Thomas and Maggie returned home with expanded horizons, having seen a world beyond the ranch. But despite the opportunities elsewhere, Tessa and Quinn never seriously considered leaving Arizona. The ranch was home, the desert landscape was as much a part of them as breathing, and their work there felt vital and meaningful. "We're building something important here," Tessa said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Thomas was helping one of the ranch hands with evening chores, and Maggie was inside having a tea party with her dolls and a very patient Rusty, who was now 12 years old and moving slowly. "We are," Quinn agreed. "Not just the ranch, but a different way of approaching this life. Showing that you can be successful without being cruel, that progress doesn't require leaving humanity behind." Tessa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, marrying me, taking on all the complications that came with my ambitions?" "Never. Not for a single moment." Quinn kissed the top of her head. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Tessa. You and our children and this life we've built. I wouldn't change any of it." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady reliability. He could handle any animal on the ranch with ease, and by age 12, he was conducting his own observations on horse behavior, taking detailed notes that Tessa helped him organize into a coherent study. Maggie remained a whirlwind of energy and determination. She declared at age 8 that she was going to be a veterinarian like her grandfather, and Tessa began teaching her anatomy and physiology, using their ranch animals as living lessons. Maggie proved to have a natural gift for understanding animal health, able to diagnose issues that the ranch hands missed. In 1892, when Thomas was 13 and Maggie was 9, tragedy struck. Old Rusty, who had been slowing down for months, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The family found him in the morning, lying in his favorite spot on the porch, looking like he was just sleeping. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the creek, the same place where Quinn had first seen Tessa teaching coyotes all those years ago. The whole family attended the burial, along with the ranch hands who had all known and loved the old dog. "He was the beginning of everything," Quinn said, standing at the grave with his arm around Tessa. "If I hadn't been trying to teach him to sit that day, if he hadn't run off and led me to the ridge, I might never have met you." "He brought us together," Tessa agreed, tears streaming down her face. "And he was a good, faithful friend for 14 years. We were lucky to have him." Thomas and Maggie each placed a flower on the grave, and they erected a simple wooden marker that read, "Rusty, beloved companion, he led us to each other." The loss of Rusty hit the family hard, but they healed together, sharing memories and supporting each other through the grief. Eventually, Maggie began campaigning for a new dog, and they adopted a puppy from a litter in town. A female they named Daisy, who had Rusty's same soulful eyes and gentle temperament. As the 1890s progressed, the ranch continued to thrive. Quinn and Tessa had become respected figures not just in Winslow but throughout the territory. When Arizona began the process toward statehood, Quinn was asked to serve on a committee advising on agricultural practices, and Tessa was consulted on wildlife conservation efforts. "We're becoming respectable," Quinn joked one evening. "Heaven forbid," Tessa replied with a grin. "Next thing you know, we'll be invited to society dinners and expected to make polite conversation about the weather." But respectability had its advantages. When Maggie expressed a desire to attend veterinary school, doors opened that might have been closed to another young woman. Letters of recommendation from her mother, whose scientific work was now known internationally, and from prominent ranchers who could attest to Maggie's skill with animals, secured her admission to a progressive veterinary program in California. Thomas, meanwhile, had fallen in love with ranching itself. He had no desire to leave Arizona, content to work alongside his father, expanding their operations and implementing new techniques based on his mother's research. "Are you disappointed?" Thomas asked Tessa one evening. "That I don't want to pursue scientific research like you?" Tessa looked at her son, now 18 and already taller than his father, with surprise. "Disappointed? Thomas, you're conducting research every day, just in a practical rather than theoretical way. You're applying scientific principles to ranching, testing theories, documenting results. That's valuable work, and I'm proud of you for knowing what makes you happy." The summer of 1897 brought celebration. Maggie graduated from veterinary school, one of only 3 women in her class, and returned to Winslow to open her own practice. Thomas married a kind schoolteacher named Sarah Miller, daughter of a neighboring rancher, in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Quinn and Tessa watched their son take his vows, remembering their own wedding 19 years earlier in the small church in town. They had been so young then, taking such a leap of faith, trusting that love would be enough to build a life on. "It worked," Quinn whispered to Tessa as Thomas and Sarah kissed. "Of course it did," Tessa whispered back. "We worked at it. Love isn't enough by itself, Quinn. It takes respect and partnership and effort, but we've always been willing to put in that effort. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As the new century approached, bringing with it technological changes and social upheaval, the Ramsay Ranch stood as a testament to what was possible when people worked together with respect for each other and for the natural world. Quinn and Tessa, now in their late 40s, had slowed down slightly but remained active in both ranch operations and Tessa's research. They had expanded the house again, adding space for Thomas and Sarah, who had presented them with their first grandchild in 1898, a boy they named Quinn after his grandfather. Maggie lived in town but came out to the ranch several times a week to check on the animals and visit with her family. The grants program Tessa had established had supported over 100 women in their scientific pursuits by this point. and several of those women had gone on to make significant contributions to their fields. Tessa corresponded regularly with many of them, maintaining a network of female scientists that supported and encouraged each other. "You've built something that will outlast us," Quinn told her one evening as she finished a letter to one of her grant recipients. "We've built something that will outlast us," Tessa corrected, as she always did. "None of this would have been possible without you, Quinn. Your support, your belief in me, your willingness to challenge the conventions of our time. You made space for me to do this work, and that's a rare gift." In 1902, as they celebrated their 24th wedding anniversary, Quinn and Tessa took a trip back to the ridge where they had first met. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, revisiting the place where their lives had intersected and changed forever. The cottonwood tree was still there, larger now, its branches providing deep shade. The creek, which had been nearly dry that first day, flowed with spring runoff. They sat on the same flat rock where they had watched the coyotes all those years ago, and as if on cue, two coyotes appeared from the brush. "Those are the great-great-grandchildren of the ones we first watched," Tessa said softly. "I've been tracking this family group for over 2 decades now. 5 generations, all living in roughly the same territory. Like us," Quinn said, "putting down roots, building something that lasts." The coyotes watched them with intelligent eyes, unafraid, recognizing Tessa after all these years. She had brought dried meat, as she always did, and tossed small pieces to them. The animals accepted the offering with dignity, then melted back into the desert. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this," Tessa said, lacing her fingers through Quinn's. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was running away from disappointment and loss. I never expected to find everything I needed in the Arizona desert. I never imagined I'd find anyone who understood me," Quinn replied. "I thought I was destined to live alone, working my ranch, existing but not really living. And then I found you teaching tricks to my dog, charming wild animals, bringing life and passion to this harsh landscape." "We found each other," Tessa said. "That's the miracle, Quinn. That in this vast territory, in this particular time, we managed to find each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent, painting the sky in the colors they had seen thousands of times but never tired of. 24 years of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together from nothing but love and determination and hard work. "If we could go back," Quinn asked, "knowing everything we know now about how hard it would be sometimes, about the struggles and the sacrifices, would you still make the same choice? Would you still marry me?" Tessa turned to look at him, this man who had loved her unconditionally, who had supported her dreams even when they were unconventional, who had built a life with her that honored both of them equally. His hair was gray now, his face lined with years of sun and wind, but his blue eyes still looked at her with the same love and wonder they had held on their wedding day. "Without hesitation," she said. "Every single time I would choose you, I would choose us." They kissed there on the ridge, in the golden light of late afternoon, and it felt like a renewal of the vows they had made all those years ago. The years that followed brought more changes. Thomas and Sarah had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Maggie's veterinary practice thrived, and she became known throughout the territory for her skill and compassion. She never married, claiming that her work was her passion and she needed nothing else, though Tessa suspected there might be more to the story than Maggie let on. Quinn and Tessa gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, leaving more responsibility to Thomas, while they focused on Tessa's research and writing. Tessa published a comprehensive book on animal behavior in the American Southwest, in 1905, drawing on nearly 3 decades of observations and study. The book was widely acclaimed and became required reading in several university programs. "You did it," Quinn said, holding the first printed copy in his hands. "You changed the scientific world's understanding of animal behavior." "We did it," Tessa insisted. "Your name should be on this book too, Quinn. You've been my research partner through all of it." But Quinn shook his head. "This is your triumph, love. I'm just happy I got to be part of the journey." In their later years, Quinn and Tessa became the heart of an extended family that sprawled across the ranch. Thomas's children grew up learning their grandmother's gentle methods with animals and their grandfather's steady reliability. Maggie's nieces and nephews adored their unconventional aunt, who could heal sick animals and tell fascinating stories about her years in veterinary school. The ranch itself had become a model for humane and efficient animal husbandry, drawing visitors from around the world who wanted to learn the Ramsay methods. Quinn and Tessa gave tours, shared their knowledge freely, and never stopped innovating and improving their practices. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, the family threw a grand celebration at the ranch. Over 100 people attended, including former grant recipients who had traveled from across the country to honor the woman who had made their careers possible. Ranchers who credited the Ramsays with revolutionizing their industry, and townspeople from Winslow who had watched the couple build their remarkable life together. Speeches were given, toasts were made, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. But the moment Quinn treasured most came late in the night, after most of the guests had departed. He and Tessa stood together on the porch of the house they had built, expanded and filled with love over 4 decades. 40 years, Tessa said wonderingly. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Quinn replied. One sunrise after another, one challenge faced together, one small moment of joy multiplied by thousands. Their children and grandchildren were scattered around the property, the younger ones sleeping and the older ones still talking and laughing. It was everything Quinn had never known he wanted, a legacy not just of land and cattle but of love and family and purpose. "You remember what you said to me that first day we met?" Tessa asked. "You said you'd be in my debt if I could teach Rusty anything." Quinn laughed. "I remember. And you certainly delivered on that." "I think the debt went both ways," Tessa said. "You gave me space to be myself, to pursue my work, to be both a scientist and a wife and mother. Not many men of our generation would have done that. Then they're fools. Supporting you has been the greatest privilege of my life." As the moon rose over the Arizona desert, casting silver light across the land they had tamed and protected, Quinn and Tessa reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. From that chance meeting on the ridge, when a frustrated rancher had stumbled upon a woman teaching coyotes to sit, they had built something remarkable. The ranch would continue for generations, Thomas and his children already making plans for its future. Tessa's scientific work would influence animal behavior studies for decades to come. The women they had supported through the grants program would go on to make their own contributions to science and society. The humane methods they had pioneered would slowly transform how animals were treated throughout the ranching industry. But more than any of those accomplishments, they had created a marriage based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and abiding love. They had shown that a woman could be brilliant and accomplished while also being a devoted wife and mother. They had proved that a man could support his wife's ambitions without diminishing his own worth. They had demonstrated that true partnership meant celebrating each other's strengths and supporting each other through weaknesses. "I love you," Quinn said, pulling Tessa close. "Every day for 40 years, I've loved you more than the day before. "And I love you," Tessa replied. "My partner, my friend, my heart. Thank you for this beautiful life." As they stood together in the moonlight, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, Quinn thought back to that morning 40 years ago when he had been trying in vain to teach Rusty to sit. He had been lonely then, though he hadn't fully recognized it, living a half-life focused solely on survival and material success. And then Tessa had appeared, this remarkable woman with a gift for understanding every living thing, and she had taught him so much more than dog training. She had taught him about partnership, about respect, about building a life that honored both people in a marriage. She had shown him that love wasn't about possession or control, but about creating space for each other to grow and thrive. Their story was unconventional for their time. A scientist wife and a rancher husband who shared work and decision-making equally. But it had worked, better than either of them could have imagined, because they had both been willing to challenge the conventions that might have limited them. In the years that followed their 40th anniversary, Quinn and Tessa continued to be active in their respective fields, though age inevitably slowed them down. They spent more time on the porch, watching sunsets and sharing stories with their grandchildren. They took long walks through the property, observing the wildlife that Tessa had spent a lifetime studying. They read together in the evenings, discussed the changing world, and marveled at how far they had come from that first meeting on the ridge. When Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76 in 1928, Tessa held his hand and whispered words of love and gratitude for the 50 years they had shared. The funeral was attended by hundreds, testament to the impact he had made not just through his ranching innovations, but through his example of what a good man, a supportive husband, and a loving father could be. Tessa lived another 5 years, continuing her research until just weeks before her death at 81. Her final publication, a retrospective on 50 years of observing coyote families in the Arizona Territory, was released posthumously and dedicated to Quinn, my partner in all things, who saw me for who I truly was and loved me for it. They were buried side by side on the ridge overlooking the creek, near where Rusty had been laid to rest decades before. The marker reads simply, Quinn and Tessa Ramsay. They built a life of purpose, passion, and love. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management and eventually passed to his children. Maggie's veterinary practice was taken over by one of her nieces who had followed in her footsteps. The grants program Tessa had established continued to support women in scientific fields, expanding over the years to help hundreds more achieve their dreams. But perhaps the most enduring legacy Quinn and Tessa left was the example of their marriage itself. In a time when women were expected to subsume their identities and ambitions to their husbands, they had created a true partnership. They had shown that supporting each other's dreams didn't diminish either partner, but strengthened both. They had proved that love combined with respect and genuine partnership could overcome any obstacle. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing stories about the cowboy, who had been trying to teach his dog to sit, and the scientist who had appeared as if by magic, charming wild animals and ultimately charming the cowboy himself. They heard about how Tessa had revolutionized animal behavior studies while raising 2 children and helping build a successful ranch. They learned how Quinn had supported his wife's unconventional career at a time when most men would have demanded she stay home. And they understood, through those stories, and through the physical evidence of the ranch and the research station and the ongoing grants program, that love at its best was about building something together that was greater than either person could create alone. The cottonwood tree on the ridge still stands, a living monument to the chance meeting that changed 2 lives and ultimately touched thousands more. Visitors to the Ramsay Ranch, which operates to this day as both a working cattle operation and a historical site, often make the pilgrimage to the ridge to see where it all began. Sometimes, if you're there at the right moment, you might see coyotes moving through the brush, descendants of the families Tessa studied for so many years. And if you're very quiet and very patient, you might observe the same behaviors she documented, the complex social interactions and emotional bonds that she worked so hard to help the world understand. The story of Quinn and Tessa Ramsay is ultimately a story about seeing and being seen, about finding someone who recognizes your true value and supports you in becoming your best self. It's about the courage to challenge societal conventions when they limit human potential, and the wisdom to build a life based on mutual respect rather than rigid roles. From that first moment when Quinn found Tessa teaching his dog tricks he never could, when he recognized that she had a way with every living thing, they embarked on a journey that proved love combined with respect, partnership, and shared purpose could create something truly extraordinary. They lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, that is the best legacy any life can leave.